This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Payton Dahmer, supervisor of the K-State Sheep and Goat Center, to discuss what is taking place at the center. We are also joined by Ron Wilson for a Kansas profile with information about the Stafford County Port Authority. K-State Extension Agriculture Policy Specialist Jenny Ifft continues the show with information about annual Forage Insurance. She says there were 135,000 acres enrolled in it last year. Rounding out today's show is K-State Nursery Crop and Marketing Specialist Cheryl Boyer. She says new research is focusing on using substrate stratification to reduce water use, especially in larger containers. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we're discussing the Sheep and Goat Center here at Kansas State University, and to talk about kind of some of the work that they've been doing and are hoping to continue to do. We have the supervisor of the Sheep and Goat Center, Payton Dahmer. Payton, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to get to share a little bit about what we're doing with the sheep and goat programs at K-State.
The Sheep and Goat Center here at Kansas State University, what does it do and what purpose is it serving?
Yeah, the Sheep and Goat Center is really designed as a teaching and extension center, and we are fortunate that of land-grant universities in the United States, we probably have the nicest facility to work with of any institution. And so we teach a variety of classes that involve anywhere from 50 to 100 undergraduate students that get them directly involved with sheep and goats and sheep and goat production every year, hosting extension events for producers and youth livestock exhibitors, as well as doing research both in the animal science department and some of our collaborators across Kansas.
And with those students, what are you hoping that they get to learn from coming to the sheep and goat unit?
The biggest thing that we try to do is just get them exposed to the sheep and goat industries. We, of course, have a large variety of students that come from a large variety of backgrounds as well, many of those not having a traditional background either in production ag or specifically with sheep and goats. And so really trying to get them exposed to sheep and goat industries and hopefully get them excited to maybe become involved in the industry, whether that's being a producer themselves someday or working some way to help benefit the industry in the future.
And sometimes students get to work out there, and so what type of hands-on process do they get to do when working?
At any given semester, we typically have about 10 undergraduate student employees, and I really love the opportunity to work with those kiddos because many of them, again, don't come from a sheep and goat background, and I try to make it more of a experience than just a day job for them. And so those students get to get their hands dirty and get involved with every aspect of raising sheep and goats. We were up at 6 o'clock this morning working ewes, and they were there helping give shots, helping trim hooves and things like that. And so those students really get a hands-on look at what it's like to raise sheep and goats, and many of them learn that they really enjoy it and hopefully want to go back into the industry. We get a lot of pre-vet students that have interest in working with livestock in their veterinary profession, and so they get that hands-on experience doing things with sheep and goats.
Another experience that people get sometimes with Sheep and Goat Center is doing research projects out there. What are some that are currently going on?
We are fortunate that we have a really strong undergraduate research program, and that's one of the primary users of the center from a research standpoint. We typically conduct around 2 projects every year through our animal science department with industry funding still, but a project that we can get around 20 students involved with, and they help us complete that research, as well as some of our collaborators at the College of Vet Med. And so this summer we're working on a couple different projects, one of which is looking at feeding yeast to lambs in the post-weaning period to help with that transition and to help eliminate some issues with coccidiosis, something that every producer has challenges with. And then we're working with a group at the College of Vet Med on some different drug approval studies for lameness in both sheep and goats, using a goat model for the study, but hopefully can lead to some different drug approvals in both the sheep and goat industries.
So something important to K-State and K-State Research and Extension, the outreach, the teaching, and just the continual learning for not only the experts on the matter, but for Kansas producers.
We hope that, this research, even though we're doing undergraduate research projects, we still, try to provide novel, meaningful data at the end of these projects that we can put into either extension publications or scientific manuscripts that can be useful for sheep and goat producers, not even just in the state of Kansas, but across the country, and really have high hopes over the next few years to ramp up our research efforts even more and host more extension events where we can share that data with producers as they come to the university.
And something else that the center has been doing that you mentioned beforehand is holding more youth events, so maybe getting people more involved at a younger age?
One of the biggest sectors of the sheep and goat industries here in the state of Kansas is the youth livestock arena. And so we have a lot of young 4-H FFA exhibitors that are showing sheep and goats at the county fair all the way up to the national level. And so K-State Animal Science is obviously a big proponent of those activities. And so whether it's hosting our junior sheep and goat producer days or livestock judging camps, we have the Kansas Animal Science Leadership Academy visiting with us this week. Many different avenues that high school, middle school, even younger age students from across the state can come to the center, learn about sheep and goats, learn about livestock production, and hopefully get them excited to be involved in those industries.
And so what are some of your favorite aspects been as you've been a supervisor at the center?
I've really enjoyed my time, and as I make the transition, I was kind of the graduate student manager, and then now as I moved into a faculty role, oversee those students a little bit more. But the best part for me is getting to work with the students. I love seeing young people that maybe don't have a background in animal agriculture or the sheep and goat industries in particular. I love seeing them kind of break down those barriers and get excited about being involved in production ag and learning. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty. They love working with sheep and goats, and you can see kind of the enthusiasm they have to go out and make the ag industry a better place after their time at K-State. Of course, getting to work with high-quality livestock, getting to work with producers is great, but the young people that we get to have here at K-State and take through the center, I think, is the most rewarding part for me.
So is the center currently evolving and maybe hoping to see new things moving forward and even having more interaction with producers?
We hope to, over the next year and then moving forward, continue building on some of our extension-based events. And so trying to work with industry stakeholders, folks like the Kansas Sheep Association, that we can host producers there at the center and kind of give them updates from a research standpoint what we're doing, continue educational programming throughout the state. And that kind of leads into an exciting time that we're at, where we're one step closer to being able to bring back a sheep and goat extension specialist here at Kansas State University. And so that'll be a great resource for our producers in the state to kind of help us ramp up those efforts.
Payton, I appreciate you coming on and giving us some information about the Sheep and Goat Center and maybe what to expect moving forward.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the invitation, and I encourage anybody that has questions about what we're doing, go to our website, reach out. I'm always happy to visit with producers or folks that just want to know a little bit more about what we're doing. We always welcome visitors and hope to keep providing for the sheep and goat industries here in Kansas.
That was K-State Supervisor of the Sheep and Goat Center, Payton Dahmer. The link to the center's website will be found in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're now going to be joined with Ron Wilson, the director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. Let's go to the port. If that calls in mind a big harbor full of ships and seagulls, think again. There are other kinds of ports, such as an airport or a rail port. Today we'll learn about a rural Kansas county which is using a port authority to support railroad infrastructure so as to benefit the local economy. It's today's Kansas Profile. We met Carolyn Dunn, president of the Stafford County Port Authority and past director of economic development in Stafford County. We will learn about a port authority. Stafford County is an agricultural-based county in the middle of Kansas. One of its assets is a railroad line. When Carolyn Dunn first took the job as County Economic Development Director, she was approached by 3 different companies which were interested in establishing a large grain car loading facility along the railroad in the county. In each case, the deals did not pencil out, and the companies went elsewhere. We had to figure out how to make this viable for them, Carolyn said. Rather than those companies having to absorb all the cost of land and track, we looked for a way to structure this so that it makes it advantageous to attract businesses, she said. Her research on alternatives led to something called a port authority. This happened to be the same legal structure that a Kansas leader named Huck Boyd had successfully used to support railroad service after the Rock Island Railroad closed in northwest Kansas. A port authority is a quasi-governmental special use district authorized to operate transportation infrastructure. In a sense, it might function like an airport or water port, but in Kansas it has been used with railroads. Typically, the Port Authority would own the land and railroad sidings and then lease access to companies that ship goods. Stafford County Economic Development sought to use the Port Authority to establish a local rail transloading facility with an industrial park. This would mean building a loop to the main railroad with space for loading and unloading facilities. This would allow trains and trucks to receive and transfer cargo, such as grain or manufactured products. Establishing the Port Authority requires state legislative approval. The Kansas legislature authorized the Stafford County Port Authority back in 2014. Stafford County Commissioners authorized formation of it in 2015. A Port Authority Board of Directors was appointed by the county commissioners. The county then contracted with a K-State agricultural economics professor to conduct a feasibility study on how best to implement it. A grant was received to do the engineering and legal work. Potential sites were evaluated. A large grain handling company signed a letter of intent to build a unit car loading facility there. $5 million was raised for the project. In 2022, a 256-acre site was purchased near two major highways and next to the railroad right-of-way. Carolyn transitioned from Economic Development Director to her new role as President of the Port Authority. Much work remains to be done on the project. If all goes as planned, this project would stimulate an estimated initial $15 million in private investment by a grain handling anchor tenant. Improved efficiency in grain transportation should improve local grain prices, adding $7.5 to $9 million annually into the local economy. In addition to the seasonal shipment of grain at harvest time, we think this can benefit industrial shippers in the county by providing a local point of access to the railroad for companies that don't have their own rail siding, Carolyn said. One example would be Hudson Cream Flour. That company is located in the rural Stafford County community of Hudson, population 95 people. Now that's rural. For more information, see www.staffordport.com. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Once again, that was the director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, Ron Wilson. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and today we're going to discuss annual forage insurance. And to talk about it, we have K-State Extension Ag Policy Specialist, Jenny Ifft. Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
We're talking about annual forage insurance, as I mentioned. However, we want to first distinguish that annual forage insurance is not the same as pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance.
So annual forage insurance covers lower rainfall or precipitation than normal for crops that are produced to feed livestock. I think a lot of producers won't be familiar with it. We only had 135,000 acres in the state of Kansas for annual forage last year. However, producers are probably familiar with pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance, PRF. PRF covers 5 million acres of land that's used for haying or grazing in this state in 2023, but it only covers, again, perennial crops. So annual forage is there for crops that are grown on an annual basis to feed livestock.
So a bit of a difference there. Now that we have it distinguished, we're really just going to talk about annual forage insurance here today. And so you've mentioned a little bit about what it is, and there are different options within choosing what annual forage insurance you want to do. Could you describe what those are?
Like any insurance product, there are a lot of choices. First of all, just to back up a little bit, it covers a crop that's used for forage or to feed livestock. So as long as it's annually grown, it could be grazed, it could be hayed, it could be for silage, green chop, any of those type of uses. Again, it's insuring against lower precipitation than normal. So there can be other causes of low yield. It's not going to cover all of them. It's going to cover low precipitation, which we had an awful lot of recently in this state and several states throughout the West. So annual forage is going to cover the risk of lower precipitation than normal, but it's not for a particular field or farm or ranch. It's lower precipitation in a grid, and that's about 14 by 16 miles. So it's going to be smaller than a county. It's going to be bigger than a lot of farms.
The options that they have to choose from, what are those for producers?
There's several. So one is a coverage level, and this is a standard choice with nearly any crop or forage insurance product. For annual forage, it goes from 70 to 90% in 5% increments. So a higher coverage level, you're more likely to get a payout, and your payout's going to be a higher value. So it's pretty simple when you think of it. 90% is, think of 90% of normal precipitation. So if precipitation is lower than 90%, you get a payout. If you pick the 70%, your precipitation has to drop below 70% of the historic average to get a payout.
And so coverage level is something they can choose. However, there are productivity factors that also get factored into annual forage insurance.
And so, if you think about, different types of crops, you go for grazing or haying, they can have a wide range of values, a wide range of costs, and a wide range of production. So instead of having particular types of crops that you can select, what you have instead is this thing called a productivity factor. And that's going to scale up or down the value of your crop or your insurance guarantee from 60% of the county average to 150% of the county average. So if you're growing a higher value crop, you could choose to have a higher productivity factor. If you're growing a lower value crop, you could choose to have a lower productivity factor. Some producers may also choose to have that lower productivity factor just to manage the cost of the insurance.
And another factor that a producer has to make a choice on is the growing season and intervals.
Right. So the growing season is going to correspond to when your crop is grown. So usually there will be early and late planting. So it's like other crop policies where you have an early and late planting date. So that's going to be a month or month and a half before the growing season begins. And then what you're doing is you're insuring against lower than normal rainfall during that growing season. The growing season is a 7-month period. And the producer has to pick. And within that, there's intervals, 2-month intervals. So it's 7 months, but the intervals are 2 months. So usually you're going to have 2 or 3 intervals within that 7-month period. If a producer has never done this, it's a little bit more complicated. There's some more learning here. But what's really important is that you get to pick, to some degree, what are the most important periods within the growing season that you're insuring for. So first of all, there's weights for each interval. So typically you can max out at 40%. There are a couple of growing seasons where you can have 50% intervals now. But that 40%, so you could do one at 40% max, the next one at 40%, 20%. So there's different weights you can give. A producer can go back and look at their yield history, or, if they have some idea of what forage yields are, they can select those weights there. But, it is something that can be personalized to a particular producer situation.
And if producers used annual forage insurance last year, what are some changes that are coming for this year?
So these changes are designed to increase flexibility for producers. So if you've looked at it in the past, it's going to be a little different. If you used it before, time to sit down with your insurance agent and figure out these changes. But again, they are designed to increase flexibility. So previously there was 4 growing seasons, and now there's 12 growing seasons. So each growing season will correspond with the beginning of a month. So if you think, September, we have this July 15th deadline to buy annual forage. So September is growing season 1, and the planting dates would be from mid-July to the end of August. And then you have another growing season that begins on October, November, December. There is a restriction in Kansas. You can't have the growing seasons 5 and 6 aren't allowed in Kansas. So those would be the growing seasons that begin in February and March. But for the most part, they're going to correspond to every month of the year and go for 7 months.
And so what's the payout process for annual forage insurance?
Well, the precipitation, what the USDA does is they take official precipitation data, and they're going to make those estimations for precipitation or rainfall within each grid. That's going to be done automatically. So there's no loss adjustment. The producer doesn't have to file a claim. It's just if precipitation is lower within a particular interval, a producer gets a payment automatically.
What's an example that maybe if producers are having trouble understanding if they are qualified for this?
I did run a sample for Hodgman County. So let's say a producer is going to plant forage sorghum, and they're going to pick growing season 11, which starts in July. And so they plant forage sorghum in June. Let's say they really are concerned about rainfall at the beginning of the growing season. So they're going to weight it as heavily as they can. So they get 50% weight at the July to August interval and 50% weight at that September to October interval. And then they're going to harvest in October. And for the example that I ran, select the coverage level of 90%. It's the highest possible coverage level, productivity factor of 100%. So if a producer had bought a policy, if a policy had been available for 2022 with those choices, they would have paid a premium of $22 per acre. So pretty comparable to other types of crop insurance. However, indemnities, because of the severe drought during 2022, they would have received an indemnity of $92 per acre. There would have been pretty big losses or very low rainfall within each of those intervals that they selected. That experience is pretty common for 2022. So there was $10 million in indemnities for annual forage in 2022, that's over 135,000 acres, it averages out to about $77 per insured acre. So when there's, severe or extreme drought, these policies, that's when they're designed to make these large payouts.
And what are some advantages or disadvantages for a producer as they're thinking about possibly using annual forage insurance?
There are definitely advantages and disadvantages to annual forage. And if a producer has never used PRF or some other type of rainfall index product, it's something you want to think about carefully, because you're not insuring your farm or your fields. You're insuring precipitation being lower than normal within a 2-month period in this grid. So wherever your farm or ranch is located. So if your experience is different, you could either not get a payout when you need it, or you could get a payout when you don't need it. Both can and do happen. So it's something that's important to be aware of. Also, you're looking at a 2-month period. So what if you get rain at the end, but you really need it at the beginning of that interval? So producers need to understand that these things can happen and be aware of that. Like any insurance product, if you have sufficient, or I guess say normal may not be sufficient, but if you have rainfall that's close to normal for a couple years, you might not get a payout, but you're going to be paying those premiums. So producer also needs to understand that and take a long-term perspective to that. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that the government pays for part of the premium cost. So, the government paying about half of that cost. Because of that, it's designed so a producer comes out ahead over the long run. So you should get more indemnities than in premiums in the long run, but it's not going to happen every year. One nice thing about annual forage is that the indemnities are calculated automatically. So if you don't have a production history, if you don't track or measure your forage yields on a regular basis, say if you're grazing, that doesn't matter. All that matters is the precipitation within your grid.
For those who are wanting to really look into the annual forage insurance, there is a deadline of July 15th to get that done. Where could they find out more information?
Talk to your insurance agent. First of all, we have an article on AgManager.info. The USDA website has resources. So there's a lot of good resources out there. And, a lot of these crop insurance agents do have tools, different decision support tools, where they can really sit down with a producer. And when you're doing something new, having that good relationship and being able to talk through intervals, coverage levels, productivity factors, weights, all of this stuff with somebody who's going to really sit down with you is very important.
That was K-State Extension Ag Policy Specialist Jenny Ifft. The deadline for the annual forage insurance is July 15th, and we will link her article on AgManager.info in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. As container gardening continues to increase in popularity, new research is focusing on reducing water use, especially in larger containers. K-State nursery crop and marketing specialist Cheryl Boyer says this new research is focusing on what's called substrate stratification.
So that's where they're taking these substrates that have different properties and layering them in a container. And part of that is if you think about how a plant is going to grow, you put that little tiny plant in your container and it's really only using the food and the water that's available in the first few inches. And as that plant grows, it might not need access to that much food or access to that much density. So it might benefit from having a layer of coarseness. So this is relevant if you have a really big pot. You might be able to put mulch in the bottom and then layer on your more expensive materials and still have a really good experience with a container, and it's not as heavy. So it's kind of a really cool innovation, and it's fun to see what they're learning and what they're trying. And a lot of this work has been done at Louisiana State University and at the USDA in Ohio. And so it's just really cool to see what they're trying and how they're innovating and really rethinking how we approach a container. But it's still brand new thinking. And I think probably the biggest application would be really large containers that would benefit from some coarseness at the bottom, not broken shards, but some organic mulch. And that would help them not be as heavy as well.
And there are a lot of resources through Extension, a lot of information really from just your local nursery as well.
Yeah, so it's always wonderful to talk to your independent garden center. They have tons of information, lots of specialized training to help people think through what their needs are. And they can just lickety-split help you find exactly the type of plant that meets your needs. And everybody has different specific needs and goals for their lawn and landscape and their container plants. And every part of your yard is a little bit different. So I think that's one of the fun things about gardening and being someone who loves plants is that you get to try new things every year. And over time, your yard will change. It might get shadier, or you might lose a tree and move to full sun, and you get to try something new. And that's when you can go use those resources. You can use your folks at the local independent garden center, and they'll put out some educational resources probably on their social media as well. But please don't forget to contact your local extension horticulture agent. They have tons of resources, and I love to think about horticulture agents like information nodes. I mean, all of us as extension professionals, if we don't know the answer because we've had the question before and looked it up, we know pretty quickly which direction to look to find the right answer. We have a presence in all 105 counties, and we have about 30-ish agents who have some sort of specialization in horticulture that can help answer questions all over the state. And they help each other. They network. If they don't know the answer, if they get something that stumps them, they ask the rest of the team. And so we're able to share and resource all across the state to help answer your questions. Wherever they are, whatever they might be, we will help you find an answer.
Also put in a plug for the K-State Garden Hour because that's a popular show and, again, has archived information. So if you're looking for something specific, you might be able to find the answer right there and you can just watch the video.
That's true. So we actually have everything since we started doing the K-State Garden Hour webinar series in May of 2020 is archived on the Department of Horticulture and Natural Resources website. But you can just type in to a search engine, K-State Garden Hour, and it'll take you right there. There's an archive page. You'll also see what's coming up. An easier way to find it is just to go to the KSRE Videos YouTube channel. And we have a whole playlist just for all the K-State Garden Hours, and you can watch them all right there. So if you have a question about gardening, please reach out, look at the resources that we have, and we'll be happy to connect you with more things to entertain you and help you learn.
That's K-State Nursery Crop and Marketing Specialist Cheryl Boyer with information on new research into substrate stratification, as well as resources available to help Kansas gardeners. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.